Good Friday morning. We're going to reading Luke, okay? This is chapter 19. If I'm a little, well, let me read it to you, okay? This one rings a bell for me, okay? A more personal one, okay? Jesus entered the temple area and proceeded to drive out those who were selling things, saying to them, "It is written, my house shall be a house of prayer. You made it a den of thieves." And every day he was teaching in the temple area. The chief priests and the scribes and the leaders of the people, meanwhile, were seeking to put him to death, but they could find no way to accomplish their purpose because all the people were hanging on his words. There is a lot more extensive narrative on this very event. He knocks the tables over, doesn't he? Yeah, that must be it must be, well, this is Luke. It must be in Matthew. Okay, I don't know. I didn't look it up. I didn't leave it to me. Ain't much of a scholar. Okay, but it's a disruption of the temple. It's the reduction of the temple to a marketplace, you see. And we're, in a way, I don't mean this in any harsh manner, but I think back when I was a kid growing up and going to St. John's Church in New Haven, St. John the Evangelist. God, I owe my faith to that parish, the nuns that taught us there. God, Lord. And I was a high school. I was in the public school, so my access to the faith came through Sunday Mass and Sunday school and the nuns. I remember Sister Ann. God, she'd be 110 years old. She's an hour old right now. God, what a good teacher she was. A model of faith. Yeah, that's a true story. I owe so much to that early faith. It wasn't just pious. There was a great depth to it all. But there was a practice we had in our parish, and I think it might have been in all of them, and it was money changers. They would sit out in the foyer of the church, and you give them $1, and they would give you back 85 cents. And they weren't cheating you. You knew you were going to get, and that would be your contribution. As I remember, that was your contribution for the Sunday, whatever it was, your Sunday contribution. So the money changers, I think of that. Christ condemns it in the gospel, but we were practicing it. Nobody was stealing or anything else. We all knew this was proper procedure at the time. It was completely accepted on all sides. It wasn't thievery at all. But the money changers sitting in the front, and they usually were members of the men's club and the ladies' sodality. They were the heart and soul of the parish, okay? I don't know, but I get a kick out of it. I said, boy, I wonder if anybody ever read the gospel. I think you wouldn't be doing this. But who knows how these things evolved over the years. Probably out of the necessity of the community and in so many ways. Just custom that occurred. It was harmless. And it should have been harmless, and it was harmless. But when I read this, I think, wow, we were doing the very thing he's getting, except he says they're den of thieves. We weren't thieves. They weren't thieves. This was a normal procedure in the parish, and it was very, very honest and straightforward. No one was being robbed. Nobody was being fooled. This is what it was supposed to be. It was a mode by which the church was supported. These guys weren't pocketing it, Anyway, it's a long story short. But you know how customs occur? Let me just throw these 2 cents out, okay? How the customs occur in the church and in any human enterprise, but I'm thinking of the church now. We find customs that when you think about it, it's like, boy, we're stretching the gospel for what all it's worth. Because in the human community, we adapt, we make changes, we do this, we do that. They're not destructive, but they are very human. And often you got to think, whoa, this does not seem to fit too well with the gospel. I'm trying to think, I'm not coming, but that's an example of it. But you see, I think that's the evolution of the human community, but that's also why the church is always in need of self-reflection and self-reform. In some areas, it's tiny. This one here was a tiny issue. But in some areas, it wasn't so tiny. I think this one, yes. Within the clergy, the priesthood, the need for reform, all through our history, the episcopacy, hell, the papacy. There's always been a need for reform. It's part of the beauty of the church, in my opinion. It's so enfleshed. It is so fleshy. It's not a scandal to me. I think I got over that. I got over that in the order. I told you that a million times now. I left my idealism. I let it go. And what I saw was holiness, not idealism. And the holiness was often in the men that were struggling the most. Some of the most beautiful men I lived with were men who had the deepest problems, alcohol, whatever it may be, emotional issues. Men who struggled for their sanity and struggled for their holiness. They were the men. They were the men. They were some of the best men I ever lived with. I remember one, I told you this story, I don't want to go into names or anything, but he had such a bad problem with alcohol. So bad. But he was one of the sweetest and nicest men you could ask for. A man you would go to confession to. Why? Because he was the essence of the redemptive suffering Christ. He was a marvelous man. And when he died, there was a sadness in the monastery that I rarely saw before when a guy would die. And the rector at the time said he was a pleasure to live with. A pleasure to live with. And he was. He was a good guy. But a guy who was he was so damaged by life, but so holy in life as well. When I take that to be the story, when I see this stuff about the, money changers and this and that, it's a human condition. It's small potatoes in the gospel. Christ is mad at them, and for a lot of reasons. I don't know what they are. I don't care. It's the flesh of the church. And Christ engaging in the flesh of the church by becoming us. And in building the church around very fallible human beings, the 12 apostles. I keep thinking, why those 12? When he had available to him some of the most influential people in the world, the height of the Roman Empire. And you think of who he could have had as his apostles. Some of the greatest shapers of Western civilization could have been his apostles. 12 guys that were Joe Blow-the-Rack figure. They were nobodies. They were nobodies and nothings, and they changed the world, and they are still changing it. See? I love the flesh of the church. I'm glad she's not innocent, because then she's holy. Innocence can blind you. It can blind you because it covers what is really true, the need of redemption. Innocence can become a conceit. My nose is clean. I don't need nothing. I'm a good guy. The worst thing that you know this stuff, is to believe that you're innocent and that you don't need to reform your life in some way. The face in the mirror, when you look in the mirror, you see not just beauty, but beauty scarred. And sometimes the scars are the best part. I mean it. God save us from the innocent. I'd rather be with the guilty who are redeemed and always redeeming. I lived with both. I'll take the drunks and the fornicators over the innocent. Why? Because the drunks were holy. I'm not so sure about the innocent. I'm not so sure.